This is Atheist History Week, and I'm John Rafferty, President of the Secular Humanist Society of New York and a proud and active member of New York City Atheists, which produces this show. Each week at this time, we look at the week's anniversaries in the history of free thought. Atheism, agnosticism, secularism, humanism, skepticism, rationalism, what have you-ism. We discuss notable people, the famous, the infamous, and the not-so-famous, who were born or died or achieved something significant in regards free thought during this calendar week. And we look at significant events that took place this week in history: court cases, publishing events, religious riots, burnings at the stake, and other faith-based fun and games. It's the first week in June. And let's start this evening with perhaps the most influential, if not most famous, free thought couple in America during the 19th century. Elbert Hubbard was born June 19th in 1874. His wife, Alice Moore Hubbard, was born June 7th in 1861. She was 13 years his senior. The Hubbards were, as I say, very important, very effective, although we don't know much about them today. Elbert Hubbard was born near Buffalo, New York, and he started one of the first and certainly one of the most successful mail-order businesses in America. But he sold his interest in it at the age of 36, traveled abroad, got interested in printing books, in books and printing, and came back and established Roycroft Printing Shop in East Aurora, New York, near Buffalo, and produced what are considered some of the finest handmade books of the 19th century. He had clients like Henry Ford, Teddy Roosevelt, and Queen Victoria. He also published several periodicals, including a monthly, The Philistine, and with circulations that grew into the tens of thousands. And one of the books that he wrote and produced was a biography of Robert Greene Ingersoll, and you know, the 19th century's great infidel. And eventually, with his profits, he created, his company was called the Roycroft Press, he created a Roycroft community with a factory, a blacksmith shop, farms, banks, and an inn that is still standing in East Aurora, New York. And in the later part of his life, he was such a successful writer, a popular writer, that the Hearst newspapers hired him on as a columnist. And when once you attribute effects to the will of a personal God, he wrote, you have let in a lot of little gods and evils, then sprites, fairies, dryads, naiads, witches, ghosts, and goblins, for your imagination is reeling, riotous, drunk, afloat on the flotsam of superstition. What you know then doesn't count. You just believe. And the more you believe, the more do you plume yourself that fear and faith are superior to science and seeing. Once you attribute effects to the will of a personal God, he wrote, you have let in a lot of little gods and evils, then sprites, fairies, dryads, naiads, witches, ghosts, and goblins, for your imagination is reeling, riotous, drunk, afloat on the flotsam of superstition. What you know then doesn't count. You just believe. And the more you believe, the more do you plume yourself that fear and faith are superior to science and seeing. That's from the Elbert Hubbard section of a very influential book in the 19th century called An American Bible. And that book, An American Bible, was edited by Elbert Hubbard's wife, Alice Hubbard. She was the general superintendent, after they were married, obviously, of Hubbart's Roycroft shop, and the manager of the Roycroft Inn, and the principal of the Roycroft School for Boys. She led a busy life. By the way, they espoused egalitarianism and free thinking in marriage, and she was a leading feminist of her time, and he supported her in that. I already mentioned the Roycroft community, but while she was working all those 3 jobs that I've just mentioned, she wrote several books, including Women's Work, being an inquiry and an assumption, which she published in 1908. And she edited what I've just mentioned, an American Bible. And it's quite exemplary of the times in America, how much we have changed. An American Bible, which, by the way, she formatted to look like a Bible with the double columns and red letterings and stuff like that, which is really about free thinking. And she said in the introduction to the book, "This is the book we offer, a book written by Americans for Americans. It is a book without myth, miracle, mystery, or metaphysics, a common sense book for people who prize common sense as a divine heritage. The book that will benefit most is the one that inspires men to think and to act for themselves." The chapters included writings of what she called the prophets: Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Paine, Abraham Lincoln, Walt Whitman, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Elbert Hubbard, her husband. What a difference in the times, where a book that popular could be the product of atheism or free thinking and be a huge success and call its inspiration Americanism. And today, the loonies and the bigots on the right would tell you that if you don't believe in God, you're not an American. One of our ex-presidents, still living, as a matter of fact, infamously said that. The world, Alice Hubbard wrote in the introduction, can only be redeemed through action, movement, motion. Uncoerced, unbribed, and unbought, humanity will move toward the light. And the light she was talking about was reason. They had a pretty good life together. Ended tragically. They were on the Lusitania when it went down, the victim of a German submarine in 1915 during the First World War. And Alice Hubbard, June 7th, 1861, and Elbert Hubbard, June 19th, 1874. We skipped a little bit ahead for Elbert to the 3rd week in June, but why not? Let's talk about the two of them together, just as they spent their lives together. On June 5th in 1723, the philosopher and major economics thinker Adam Smith was born in Scotland. He was a scholar and at an early age a wunderkind, as we would call him today, and he got a scholarship at Oxford on the condition that he become a minister of the Church of Scotland. He was a rationalist. He accepted the appointment and ignored the condition. He became the chair of logic, then of moral philosophy at Glasgow University, and where he tried, unsuccessfully, to discontinue classroom prayers and religious duties. He was in the circle of Glasgow, Scotland's freethinkers, which included David Hume, the engineer James Watt, whose name you see on every light bulb you screw into the ceiling, and as a philosopher, he wrote a pretty influential book called The Theory of Moral Sentiment, which was published in 1759. He got a position as a private tutor to young noblemen, and so lived in France for a while, where he became friendly with Voltaire, Rousseau, and the other French encyclopedists. And when he came back to England, he produced his masterwork, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. Usually just referred to as The Wealth of Nations, in 1776. And while a political and social revolution was happening in America in 1776, a revolution in economics was happening with the publication the same year of The Wealth of Nations. It is a classic explanation of the free market, and it was a huge success instantly, and was translated into many other languages, and it is still the basis for, it is still the logical basis for the understanding and the practice of the free market in capitalist economy. Adam Smith never changed his mind about his free-thinking ideas. As a matter of fact, in The Wealth of Nations, one of the dicta he put down was that science is the great antidote to the poison of enthusiasm and superstition. Enthusiasm in his day did not have the positive sense that it has today. Enthusiasm was a word that basically referred to over-enthusiasm, what we would call over-enthusiasm. He was very rich from the publication of the book. He was discovered after his death that he had made many, many contributions to charity anonymously, and he stayed a rationalist, a free thinker, and very likely an atheist until the day he died in 1790. In 1985, just a couple of days ago in comparison, on June 5th, the U.S. Supreme Court gave its decision in the case of Wallace v. Jaffrey. Jaffrey was an agnostic, a father of 6 children, and an attorney in Mobile, Alabama. And in 1981, he discovered that his children were being fed daily doses of the Lord's Prayer and grace at lunch in school, with an occasional Bible. Jaffrey very bravely filed a lawsuit in May of 1982 challenging 1978 Alabama law that authorized a 1-minute period of silence. And a 1981 statute authorizing a period of silence, quote, for meditation or voluntary prayer, and also a 1982 law authorizing teachers to lead willing students prescribed prayer to Almighty God, the Creator and Supreme Judge of the world, quote unquote. The early part of the whole legal process was infamous, despicable. The judge that heard the original case, Judge Hand, permitted 600 Christians to intervene at the trial. School officials were allowed to lead children in prayer in front of the media on the courthouse steps. Jaffrey's children, of course, were ostracized, laughed at, talked about, subjected to racial epithets, Jaffrey was not a wasp, let's put it that way. And they were even physically harassed. So Judge Hand, as was expected, issued a ruling in 1983 against Jaffrey. He didn't just strike down Jaffrey's case. He said that the Supreme Court was wrong about the separation of church and state, and that the First Amendment does not bar states from establishing a religion. Guess what? It does. Finally, it got to the Supreme Court, which ruled 6-3, declaring unconstitutional a period of silence for meditation or voluntary prayer in public schools. Ishmael Jaffrey, who was called an authentic American hero for doing what he did by the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and was the first recipient of the Freethinker of the Year award at the Freedom From's convention in 1985, said, "I brought the case because I wanted to encourage toleration among my children. I certainly did not want teachers to have control over my children for at least 8 hours over the day to program them into any religious philosophy." Congratulations, Ishmael Jaffrey, and congratulations, America, for the June 4th, 1985 U.S. Supreme Court decision in Wallace v. Jaffrey. Think back to your high school graduation. Remember that music? You can all hear it in your head right now, can't you? Da, 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 da. It's called Pomp and Circumstance. Most of you probably remember that. You may have heard it at a college graduation. You certainly heard it at just about every high school graduation, and they probably play it at kindergarten, what they call graduations today. It's Pomp and Circumstance. It was composed by Edwin Elgar, who was born June 2nd in 1857 and went on to become one of Britain's most distinguished musical composers. He was raised as a believing Roman Catholic, but gave up his faith towards the end of his life. What happened was he was doing a great deal of research for some of his earlier works, which were religious in nature. One of them was called The Apostles, and another was called The Kingdom. And he took the work very seriously, and he really did some religious research. The Apostles and The Kingdom were supposed to be part of a trilogy, but he never finished them because along the way, as his biographer Brian Adams wrote, paradoxically, the excursion into biblical exegesis that Elgar did during the creation of the Apostles and the Kingdom could have played a part in the unraveling of the composer's already frayed beliefs. He gave up the Catholic faith. He gave up belief in God. And one of the things, minor thing you would think, is he, knowing that he was going to die, he was given a diagnosis of cancer by his doctor friend, Arthur Thompson, who later reported that, quote, "Elgar told me that he had no faith whatever in an afterlife. I believe there is nothing but complete oblivion." At any rate, he knew that the end was coming, and he requested cremation and that his ashes be scattered at the confluence of the Severn and the Teme rivers. That's something he wanted. Why not give it to the man? Nope. That conflicted with the doctrines of the Roman Catholic Church, and when Elgar was unconscious under morphine, his daughter brought in a priest, and he was buried in a Catholic cemetery after having been blessed by the priest, which he didn't want. and buried in a cemetery next to his wife. And as the same biographer wrote, he was betrayed by family and friends, manipulated by ruthless commercial interests, and without consolation. The commercial interests, of course, did not want the man on whom they were making money with pomp and circumstance, with the apostles and with the kingdom, to be discovered to be an atheist. But he was. Edwin Elgar, June 2nd, he died in 1934, and every time you hear those very familiar sonorous tones of pomp and circumstance, think of the atheist. People who believe in a divine creator, trying to live their lives in obedience to his supposed wishes and in expectation of a supposed eternal reward, are victims of the greatest confidence trick of all time. So wrote Barbara Smoker in her 1974 pamphlet, So You Believe in God. Barbara Smoker was born June 2nd, 1923, in Britain. In her early life, she was such a devout Roman Catholic, she was seriously considering becoming a nun. But she renounced religious faith at the age of 26, became a secular humanist activist instead, and served as president of the National Secular Society, the most militant of the British secular groups, until from the 70s to 1996. Her script, Why I'm an Atheist, was recorded for the BBC, and she got involved in a cause which is still alive very much in Britain and America today. The statutory ban on embryo research. She wrote a pamphlet called Eggs Are Not People, and which she personally distributed to all members of Parliament in 1985. She became an official, what would you call it? Not a minister, but she officiated in more than 400 secular humanist funerals, as well as wedding ceremonies and other ceremonies on behalf of the Gay and Lesbian Humanist Association, which she co-founded. She also served as the chair of the Voluntary Euthanasia Society, and she defended Salman Rushdie when Muslims held a London demonstration in May of 1989 and were doing one of their ugly demonstrations where they threatened to kill Rushdie and anybody who agreed with Rushdie and anybody who would defend Rushdie, and she stood holding a banner called, with the simple words, free speech on it. She was attacked by the demonstrators, of course, and was her life was only saved by the police intervening just at the right time. Barbara Smoker, very much active today, still writing for the Free Thinker, and born June 2nd, 1923. We have also looked at Alice and Elbert Hubbard, the 19th century freethinkers, who, especially Alice, who created an American Bible, a very, very important book of the 19th century, now fairly well forgotten. Adam Smith, whose concept of the free market in The Wealth of Nations has become the Bible of the capitalist society, and has been, by the way, I should have mentioned before, has been, some of Smith's ideas have been taken completely out of context by some right-wingers who want us to believe that we should live our lives as if we were, as if everything depended upon a free market, that people should get medicine or health care on the basis of their ability to pay. Some of the libertarians, please libertarians, no letters, but some of the libertarians take Smith's opinions and points his dicta to the extreme of we had a young man at one of our secular humanist meetings who challenged a speaker one night, and he said, you don't mean that you would give empathy to everybody. You know, in other words, there are some people we shouldn't care about. Adam, I'm John Rafferty. This has been this week, the first week in June, history, and we'll be back here next week at the same time. And I hope you'll join us for this week in atheist history.
Where we once were, we are no longer a Christian nation. At least not just. We are also a Jewish nation, a Muslim nation, and a Buddhist nation, and a Hindu nation, and a nation of non-believers.